Hello and welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Misery 12. He was in the hospital ward. Great relief swept through him. So great he felt like crying. Something had happened when he was asleep. Someone had come, or perhaps Hanny had had a change of heart or mind. It didn't matter. He had gone to sleep in the monster woman's house and had awakened in the hospital. But surely they would not put him in a long ward like this. It was as big as an airplane hangar. Identical rows of men with identical bonds of nutrient hung from identical IV trays beset from their beds filled the place. He sat up and saw the men made themselves almost identical. They were all him. Then distantly he heard the clock chime and understood that it was chiming from beyond the wall of sleep. This was all a dream. Sadness replaced with a relief. The door at the far end of the huge ward opened, and in came Annie Wilkes. Only she was dressed in a long apron dress, and there was a mob cap on her head. She was dressed as Misery Chastain in Misery's Love. Over one arm she had a whisker basket. There was a towel over the contents. She folded the towel back as he watched. She reached in and took out a handful of something and flung it in the face of the first sleeping Paul Sheldon. It was sand. He saw this was Annie Wilkes pretending to be Misery Chastain, pretending to be the Sandwoman. Then he saw the first Paul Sheldon's face had turned a ghastly white. As soon as the sand struck him, fear jerked him out of dream and into the bedroom, where Annie Wilkes was standing over him. She was holding the fat paperback of Misery's Child in one hand. Her bookmark suggested she was about 3/4 of the way through. "You were moaning," she said. "I had a bad dream." "What was it about?" The first thing, which was not the truth, that popped into his head was what he replied. "Africa." 13. She came in late the following morning, her face the color of ashes. He had been dozing, but he came awake once, jerking up at his elbows. "Miss Wilkes? Annie? Are you all—" "No." Christ, she's had a heart attack, he thought. And there was a alarm, which was immediately replaced by joy. Let her have one. A big one. A fucking chest buster. He'd be more than happy to crawl at the telephone, no matter how much it might hurt. He would crawl to the telephone over broken glass if that's what it took. And it was a heart attack, but not the right kind. She came toward him, not quite staggering, but rolling, the way a sailor will when he's just gotten off his ship at the end of a long voyage. "What?" He tried to shrink away from her, but there was no place to go. There was only one headboard, behind that the wall. "No!" She reached the side of the bed, bumped it, wavered, and for a moment seemed on the verge of falling on top of him. Then she stood there, looking at him out of her paper-white face, the cords on her neck standing out, one vein pulsing in the center of her forehead. Her hand snapped open, hooked shut into solid rock-like fists, then snapped open again. You dirty bird." What? I don't. But suddenly he did, and his entire midsection first seemed to turn hollow and then entirely disappear. He remembered where her bookmark had been last night, 3/4 of the way through. She had finished it. She knew all there was to know. She knew that Misery hadn't been the barren one after all. It had been Ian. Had she sat there in her yet as unseen by him parlor, with her mouth open and her eyes wide as Misery finally realized the truth, made her decision and sneak off to Jeffrey? Had her eyes filled with tears when she realized that Misery and Jeffrey, far from having a clandestine affair behind the back of a man they both loved, were giving him the greatest gift they could, a child he believed was his own? And had her heart risen up when Misery told Ian she was pregnant, and Ian crushed her to tears, flowing from his eyes, muttering, my dear, over and over again? He was sure in those few seconds that all those things had happened. Instead of weeping with exaggerated grief, as she had done when Misery expired, giving birth to the boy whom Ian and Jeffrey would presumably raise together, she was mad as hell. "She can't be dead!" Annie Wilkes shrieked at him. Her hands snapped open and hooked closer in a faster and faster rhythm. Misery Chastain cannot be dead. Any, please? There was a glass pitcher of water on the table. She seized it up and brandished him. Cold water splashed his face. An ice cube landed behind his left ear and slid down on the pillow into the hole of his shoulder. In his mind, so vivid, he saw her bringing the pitcher down to his own face. He saw himself dying of a fractured skull and a massive seminal hemorrhage in a freezing flood of ice water while goose pimples formed on his arms. She wanted to do it, there was no question of that. At the very last moment, she pivoted away from him and flung the glass water pitcher at the door instead, where it shattered the soup bowl they had the other day. She looked back at him and brushed her hair away from her face. 2 hard little spots of red had now bloomed in the white with the backs of her hands. "Dirty bird," she panted. "Oh, you dirty bird, how could you?" He spoke rapidly, urgently, eyes flashing, riveting on her face. He was positive in that moment that his life might have not depended on what he was able to say in the next 20 seconds. Annie, in 1871, women frequently died in childbirth. Misery gave her life for her husband and her best friend and her child. The spirit of Misery will always... "I don't want her spirit," she screamed, hooking her fingers into claws and shaking them at him as if she would tear his eyes out. "I want her! You killed her! You murdered her!" Her hands snapped shut into fists again, and she drove them down like pistons on either side of his head. They punched deep into the pillow, and he bounced like a rag doll. His legs flared, and he cried out. "I didn't kill her!" he screamed. She froze, staring at him with a narrow black expression, the look of crevasse. "Of course not, she said, bitterly sarcastic. "And if you didn't, Paul Sheldon, who did?" "No one," he said more quietly. "She just died." Ultimately, he knew this had to be the truth. If Misery Chastain had been a real person, he knew he might very well have been called upon to aid the police in their inquiries, as the euphemism went. After all, he had a motive. He had hated her. Ever since the 3rd book, he had hated her. For April Fool's Day 4 years ago, he'd had a small booklet privately printed and sent it to a half-dozen acquaintances. It had been called Misery's Hobby. And yet Misery spent a cheerful country weekend boffing Growler, Ian's Irish setter. He might have murdered her, but he hadn't. In the end, in spite of his having grown to despise her, Misery's death had been something of a surprise to him. He had remained true enough to himself to art to imitate life, however feebly, to the very end of Misery's hackneyed adventures. She had died a most unexpected death. His cheerful capering had in no way changed that fact. "You lie," Annie whispered. "I thought you were good, but you are not good. You are just a lying old dirty birdie." "She just slipped away, that's all. Sometimes that happens. It was like life, when someone just..." He overturned the table by the bed. The one shallow drawer split out. His wristwatch and pocket chain spilled out with it. He didn't even know they were there. He cringed back from her. "You must think I was born yesterday," she said. Her lips drew back from her teeth. "In my job, I saw dozens of people die. Hundreds, now that I think about it. Sometimes they go screaming. Sometimes they go in their sleep. They just slip away, the way you said, sure. But the characters in stories do not just slip away. God takes us when he thinks it's time. And a writer is God to the people in a story. He made them up just like God made us up, and no one can get a hold of God to make him explain. All right, but as far as Misery goes, I'll tell you one thing, dirty bird. I'll tell you that God just happens to have a couple of broken legs, and God just happens to be in my house eating my food, and..." She went blank then. She straightened up with her hands hanging limply by her sides, looking at the wall where an old photograph of the Arc de Triomphe was hung. She stood there, and Paul lay in his bed with round marks in the pillow beside ears and looked at her. He could hear the water which had been in the pitcher dripping on the floor, and it came to him that he could commit murder. There was a question which had occurred to him from time to time. Strictly academic, of course, only now it wasn't, and he had the answer. If she had thrown the picture, he would have shattered it on the floor himself and tried to shove one of the broken pieces of glass into her throat while she stood there as inert as an umbrella stand. He looked down at the spillage from the door, but there was only change, a pen, a comb, and his watch. No wallet, more important, no Swiss Army knife. She came back a while at a time. The anger at least was gone. She looked at him sadly. I think I better go now. I don't think I could be around you for a while. I don't think it's wise. Go where? It doesn't matter. A place I know. If I stay here, I'll do something unwise. I need to think. Goodbye, Paul. She strode across the room. Will you be back to give me my medication? He asked alarmed. She grasped the doorknob and pulled the door shut without answering. For the first time, he heard the rattle of a key. He heard her footsteps going down the hall. He winced as she cried out angrily, words he couldn't understand, and something else fell and shattered. A door slammed, an engine cranked over and started up. The low crunching squeal of tires turning back on the packed snow. Now the motor sound began to go away. It dwindled to a snore and then to a drone and was finally gone. He was alone. Alone in Annie Wilkes' house. Locked in his room. Locked in his bed. The distance between here and Denver was like the distance between the Boston Zoo and Africa. He lay in his bed, looking at the ceiling, his throat dry and his heart beating fast. After a while, the parlor clock chimed noon and the tide began to go out. And I'm going to stop there. Thanks for listening.